All right. Welcome back to the podcast. I've got a good one coming up, series I've been studying off of a Peter Santinello video where he interviews a young guy named James, who is basically he lives on the Crow Reservation in Montana. He's from the Crow tribe. He didn't mention which band. So I took a few hours going through the video and sectioning out different topics. This topic that I'm gonna cover is basically the introduction to that episode, just kind of like background information about the things mentioned in the video about the, just what I gathered from the people in the video, and then go into the places the reservation locations that they showed in the video, and then talk about some of the Crow tribe traditions that were mentioned in the video. In different episodes, I'm going to cover topics such as hunting and food, residents, people living on those tribal lands, the types of people who live there, housing, business, entrepreneurship, police and security laws, and history, including some of the lies and policies that have been mentioned from the video. Now, the reason why I like recording this information is because I feel like while indigenous groups are often treated like like as if they're from another country, because technically reservations pretty much are supposed to be technically like a different country, but it's not the same. It's not like we're talking about Canada or Mexico or Brazil or I don't know, Saudi Arabia. I mean, of course, there are definitely tribal people in all these places, but when it comes to people living on reservation lands and the tribes that those reservations were allotted to, a lot of times the kind of the information about the history of those tribes is never really taught. There are a lot of tribes that we hear the names of, popular names: Blackfoot, Crow, Chickasaw, Cheyenne, Lakota. Like, there's so many different names of tribes that are even popular as far as just basically in mainstream American knowledge. But if you start asking the average American, what about these tribes, what about these people, I mean, there are plenty of people who have traveled and gone to different states and not even known anything about the actual, gone to the states and not even known about the lands where they're at and who was there first. And I've even gone snowboarding in Taos, New Mexico. That land is for indigenous people, and I learned a little bit about the culture more so afterwards when I researched more into it. But I don't really know the politics going on there. I don't really know what they deal with. I don't know if they're being exploited, if their land is being exploited. In my own personal lineage, I have some Blackfoot and some Crow heritage. Not a super huge percentage, but even having a small percentage, other than my family just knowing that, the lineage comes from my mom's side, and that's as much as we really are taught. We don't really learn more. I've never had it, I've gone through grad school. I took one class that happened to be about Indigenous Americans, and it was generally kind of about like how like traditional structures and calendars and some of the traditional things. But you think, I learned more about multiple other countries than I learned about any of the Indigenous American people. Through all the school I went through, anything I learned, I really had to go out of my way. Now I did learn in that class I think I was in community college still, so it was sometime between like 2003 and 2006, and if it wasn't for that class, I would not have learned anything. I think in grad school, my first year, I took a class called, I think I took, in undergrad, I took an Asian American history class as well as a Black history class. I also took in grad school, I took a Latin American class, and that had some information, a little snippet about, indigenous groups of people, but not so much. And, it's kind of interesting. It's like, we're taught, even in world history in high school and U.S. history, like, you're not really taught, like, anything at all, which to me is pretty interesting. It's like, why aren't we taught anything, I think I've mentioned before that I went to the reservation of Holbrook in Arizona. I think we drove through Chinle, but I don't remember much of what we did there. But we were at an Adventist school in Holbrook, and what I learned basically talking to the children there, it was a small selection of children, because it was during their spring break, so whichever kids didn't go home or weren't allowed to go home or weren't able to go home, they were there during that spring break week, and we hung out with them. And so they didn't really have a lot of classes. They had like some stuff they had to do, but it wasn't like a whole lot of classes. They had like chores and stuff, and it was a boarding school. They lived there. Now, to my knowledge, in the modern day, it was a Navajo reservation, and to my knowledge, it wasn't at that current time, an abusive environment, but it was definitely underfunded. The kids who were going there a lot of them were sponsored by different churches and things, and it was almost used, I don't know what other term to use, but almost used sort of like an orphanage style place. Like, a lot of the kids who were there didn't have a lot of opportunities at home, and so it was maybe a safer space for them to live. But another thing was, I'd never heard of or seen of or known of boarding schools that had kids that were like kindergarten age kids. They're babies. They're like 5 years old, 6 year olds living on a campus. They don't go home to their parents. I don't know how often, but, and there was one kid while we were there that during the time period we were there, the child's family's house had unfortunately burned down, and some of the members of the community were building, I think they call it a hogan, like a traditional style house. It's like, I don't even know what to say. And I'm not talking necessarily about that group of people. I'm talking here about the Crow. And excuse me for clearing my throat. I don't know what's going on with my sinuses and my throat today, but I've had some weird thing going on off and on for the last few days, couple weeks or so. But all right, so with all that 10 minutes worth of stuff, so the Crow Reservation that we're talking about here is in the state of Montana, and the Crow call themselves Apsaalooke or Beluga. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but it translates to be children of the large beak bird. Americans refer to them, the federal name given to them was the Crow. So people use that word interchangeably. And you see around when they're driving around on the reservation, they show some areas that, even have the word Indian in there. I think the school, the hospital still have the name Indian. And I know that that's a controversial term. It's kind of the word that was used by, Columbus mistakenly thinking that he arrived in India, therefore calling the indigenous people of the land, calling them Indians, when, they're not from India. And, a lot of these people have their own names in their own languages, but, a lot of people say instead of Indian, you hear the word, Native American or indigenous Americans. Like, usually I try to use the word indigenous, but there's so many other words, indigenous. Here I'll probably use the words like indigenous or tribal people to refer to the specific indigenous or tribal Crow people. And then I'll be mentioning people who are not Crow, meaning that they would be non-tribal people or non-native people. They're Americans or other types of people. And so this video was made by Peter. He interviews the main person who gives him the tour. He's a guy who they don't really state his age. I'm guessing he's near age 18, maybe somewhere between 17 and 20, maybe. He mentions that he's about to attend Montana State University. He has a wife named Angela, and he's this, it sounds like he recently graduated from the high school at the reservation, called Crow Agency School or something like that. And so he is the son of a person that's in the video slightly. He was mostly supervising to make sure everything goes okay with Peter, making the video with his son. The father's name is Robin, and James is the son of Robin. And so they mentioned that the area of Montana called Hardin, Hardin, Montana used to be like half, they say about half of it used to be part of the Crow Reservation, but surveyors came in and they moved the borders. Hardin is one of the areas that we'll talk about more later where they have an IGA grocery store. They also showed Bighorn River, which was a large river that goes through the reservation, in the area called Crow Agency. There's a flag that they show, the Crow flag. In that area there's also the old tribal building which burned down. It sounds like it never got rebuilt, but it burned down. And at that point, James made a statement saying, you can see the state of the reservation because, we have a tribal building that was never rebuilt after it got burned down. There was a skate park that was also kind of run down. James mentioned that Montana State University is in Crow Country. He mentions, Lodge Grass area is another region that has a grocery store. On the reservation, you also see this place called Buddy Burger. And across the street from Buddy Burger is where James says his family's old house, as well as his aunt's old house. They're across from Buddy Burger. It doesn't look like anyone was living in those houses currently. And those are all kind of in this area that looks like it's called Crow Agency. So there's this place called Apsaalooke Trading Post, which is a mini mart, and people do trading and pawning there as well. And they mentioned that this Apsaalooke Trading Post, the mini mart, is the only grocery, like the only place to get food within, other than the Buddy Burger, it's the only place to really get like food within a 12-mile radius, because the grocery store that was kind of more in town burned down due to arson, and we'll talk about that more as well. James shows the Crow Fairgrounds, where the Crow Fair is held on the third week of August every year. He says it's a 100-year-old fair. There's a watering hole that he shows that's for swimming and for watering horses. They drove past a church that had an Apsaalooke Nights Casino. That's the name of the newer casino. It had a big, I don't know, you call those big signs right next to the church. It looks like it was on the church property. Like it was like right there, within like feet from the church. He mentioned that the old casino had failed, and we'll get more into that when we talk about business and things. There's a hospital that's called Crow/Northern Cheyenne Indian Hospital, Crow Agency, Montana. That's the whole name that's written on the sign. James mentions that they only hire residents for the most part, and not really the best of the students all the time. And that's the majority of the people who are working there, and it's not really long-term doctors that have been there, that have been practicing for a really long time, or the best of the best students. It's kind of like, he mentions that the federal government gives funding to get what's called get people hired for what's called the IHS, the Indian Health Services. They show a gas station called, I think it said Konoko, with a C. And he says there's a Crow tribal gas station. There was also a place called River Crow Trading Post in that same lot. And the Bighorn Mountains is one of the mountain ranges that borders the Crow country. It looks like it's west because at the time of the video the sun was setting, so it's in western Montana. That's one of the borders that you kind of see in the far distance. I don't know how far away it was, but the reservation is probably pretty big. I mean, it was their Crow land was obviously way bigger, right? Because the reservations are always going to be smaller, unfortunately, than what the original lands were. And so if you mention, I don't know how far it is, but looking at the distance, that mountain range in that distance, the Bighorn Mountains, was very, very far away from where they were at that time. You see a lot of, like, other than the river, the mountains, there's like forest, ranch land, a lot of like grassy, hilly areas, just beautiful, different colors of nature, a whole lot of nature that's not developed, which is so beautiful. And I mean, I don't know, it's pretty heavy stuff to talk about, but I sectioned out, into categories every single type of topic that was mentioned in that video. And so that is all the information about, who were the main people in the video. The James and his father Robin and Peter. Angela, the wife of James, wasn't mentioned in the video. I mean, was mentioned but wasn't shown. There was another guy who they stated was that they met outside of one of the IGA grocery stores. They said that he was a hunter, and he was shown on video, just kind of as part of the interview, talking about the expense of groceries. And James mentioned that he knows the guy that he does some hunting for the elderly, and we'll talk about that more later too in the section when we talk about food. But yeah, there's a lot more information to come. This isn't only my information. This information was presented by James, edited, recorded out by Peter Santinello, and I basically am just talking about what I sectioned out. And let me see, so in each video I'm gonna, if I can find it, I'm gonna post Peter's James Facebook link, because he has an entrepreneurial a food product, a fruit leather that he's planning to a fruit leather that he's planning to market. And his Facebook is called First Nation Foods. And I don't know if it mentions his first and last name, but his first name is James. So yeah, I'm gonna actually not record the traditional information in this episode because it's pretty lengthy already. I'm trying to keep these pretty short and succinct. For those who prefer the shorter form content, I'd prefer it just to be shorter so people will actually listen and get the information. I mean, definitely listen to Peter's video, but, my version basically is breaking everything down into different sections, because they were talking the whole time, but they were mentioning like all these different topics, just kind of like not in any specific order. Like they were kind of jumping around when they talked about one building, talking about kind of the history with it, and then like just thoughts coming up and questions coming up and answers coming out, and it wasn't really based on like categories necessarily. So I just broke it up into different categories. So just to get the information out there. I mean, I think it's very important information to get out there. And, it worries me that I've been in school for so long and was never really formally taught any of this information. I was taught more about multiple other countries that I've never even been to, probably might never even go to, more than I was taught about, the people who lived in this country, on this continent before any of the Americans got here. I mean, the way that most of my people got here was not necessarily pleasant either. But I'm not gonna really talk about my family's heritage too much more, unless it comes up again. But yeah, I just want to put the information out there because I found it very important. Okay, so with that, thanks for listening. I'm gonna record more about the traditions, the Crow traditions, culture and traditions.